Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we've got a great bag tutorial for you. This has been on my bucket list for almost 4 years is when I originally cut the fabric out for this, and I've been saving the canvas and the cork for about that length of time for you guys, and we finally got it done. So this is the Everly backpack by So Many Creations. I love her patterns, and I became a backpack convert when my family and I took our first legit vacation in years to Chicago, and I had a backpack that I trooped around the city in, and it was great because it had a zippered pocket on the inside where I could keep my cell phone and wallet nice and safe, and I could fit diapers and snacks and everything we needed to be able to exist in the city without spending so much money, because you know it's expensive to eat anything in the city. So I love this. Let's take a look at the inside features. We have 2 kits for you. This one uses Art Gallery Fabrics canvas, and I love how this looks. Obviously, if you followed me for any length of time, you know this is my favorite color scheme of all time. And when you combine those teals with the limey greens and the mint, it's just fabulous. We have got some hardware here that is in gunmetal, and we have that flip lock closure with the zipper pocket on the outside so you can keep things nice and secure. And then on the inside, we have 2 divided pockets, and it's really pretty big. You could fit quite a bit of stuff in here, and it is just gorgeous. I love how this turned out. We have one other kit option for you too, if this is not your color scheme. So we also have this Western themed one that has horses on it from Cotton and Steel. It also has the cork bottom, and cork for a bag bottom, let me tell you, is fabulous. This will hold up for years. I've got a bag that I literally use almost every day, and it is still going very strong with that canvas and cork combo. So this one has the horses on the front, and then we have gold poles and hardware, and then we have this nice light lining so that way you can see everything that's in the bag when you are searching for it. Should probably also mention that the lining in the Art Gallery bag is actually my fabric. This is from my line Nocturne that I did with QT Fabrics. I thought that feathered print would look perfect with it, and the color is absolutely fabulous. I also really like how these straps turned out. They have clips on them, so if you wanted to make it on one shoulder, you could, and kind of sling it over your side that way. And then also they're very adjustable, so you can make it many different lengths. All right, let's get in the tutorial on how to make the Everly backpack. So all of the measurements for the Everly backpack can be found in the pattern. It is a printed pattern that you'll purchase over on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. This tutorial is just meant to be a visual aid for those of you who need more than just the black and white photos. And we partner with Jessica Vandenberg, the creator of So Many Creations, to help bring these videos to you. But we want you to support her, the creator. So if you really love this bag, go grab a copy of the pattern. We've got kits available for you as well in 2 colorways, at least at the time that this video is originally going out, and you can get going and make one of these for yourself or as a gift. Now, the one exception to this is for cutting your strap. So in the pattern, it's going to tell you to use a width of fabric, but if you use the initial kit that we put together using the Art Gallery Fabrics canvas, then you are going to have a canvas that is larger than your typical 42 to 44 inch wide. So I cut my straps to 47 inches because that worked really well with being able to place the interfacing in the middle of that and still having 2 inches on the side to be free for folding and tucking everything under. And also, we weren't losing too much of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure out half of 47 from my fabric fold, and then I'm going to be able to slice off this end. Now, if you're doing this for a regular width of fabric that is that 42 to 44 inches, that is about the standard width of quilting cotton, you can just chop off the selvage edges and that'll be fine. You won't have to worry about that. Now, when you are fusing, you always want to have the interfacing with the glue side up and then the fabric. But because we want to make sure that our interfacing is a little bit shorter than our fabric, so that way we have a little bit less bulk when we're turning everything around for our strap, that's going to be cut just a little bit shorter. So what I do is I line up the folds of my fabric and then I kind of just smooth it out so that I can grab both of it together. I'm not worried that everything is perfectly aligned yet. I'll do that as I fuse, but that way I know that I'm in and I've got everything centered, and then I'm ready to follow my manufacturer's instructions to fuse this to the decor bond. Again, we want to make sure that we have this shiny side or the glue side of our interfacing facing up, and then our fabric on top of that with the right side facing up. If you do it this way, it is a lot easier to get the fusible off of your ironing surface than it is off of your iron if you mix it up and get things going the wrong way. So we're using decor bond for this part of the fusible because it's very stiff. It's going to give a lot of structure to your bag so it won't be floppy at all. That was one of the reasons why when I was a new quilter I didn't really like making bags, because they were floppy, and it was because I didn't know the difference between what you put inside of it really makes a difference to how it looks in the end. So what I'm doing here is I'm just working my way down the strap, getting that nice and fused. I'm going to work as far as I can on my pressing surface here, and then I'm just going to go give it a double check, make sure everything has fused really well before I move everything and do the other side of my strap. In order to save yourself time, I highly recommend cutting everything first and labeling your pieces. I just use address labels and I write the name of what it is on there, and then fuse everything, because then when you are ready to go and ready to sew, everything is prepped and ready for you. All right, that is looking pretty good. You can see everything is moving as one piece as it should. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot everything down and fuse the second half of my strap. Here's an example of what my pieces look like when they're all ready to go. You can see I've got everything stacked in the order that they are listed in the cutting instructions, and I have just those address labels on there, and when I need fusible it's on there, and when I don't there's no fusible. And that way I clearly know what everything is. I don't have to get out and remeasure everything. I just have everything ready for me to get sewing. So that's what we're going to do next. So the very first thing we're going to do is make our strap. We need 2 of these for the backpack because, you know, 2 shoulders. So I've already got one ready to go. The actual prepping of the strap is no different than a simple handbag strap. So if you've done the tourist tote, you should already be familiar with this process. Now remember, the interfacing should have stopped about 1 inch or 2 before the edge. That's going to make everything a little easier when we're folding everything over and sewing it down around the sliding sets that we're going to have later. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half and press it. So this is hot dog style. We want our edges to meet up, and we're just going to give it a good press. Now, depending on your canvas or your material, like if you use wax canvas, you may not even need to press. It'll just kind of hold its shape some, but it's always a good idea to really take your time here, get a nice good solid press, because it makes the sewing step easier. I'm going to continue on down the strap. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn both of these raw edges in so that they're meeting right on the center line, so that way we have nice folded finished edges on the sides of our strap. So I do this in 2 steps. We can see the crease really clearly here, so that makes everything a lot easier to work with. We're just going to fold it in like this and meet that raw edge to the center. Then we're going to iron to set that in place. Now this isn't really going to stay in place here. It wants to unfold. So what I like to do is kind of work as I go. I'm going to fold this in, and instead of pressing it first, I'm kind of flipping it over so I can make sure that my edges are nice and lined up on the bottom. So you kind of go a little bit slower on this step because you work in a little bit smaller increments as you're working. I'm able to kind of get it started, get that fold pressed with my hands first, then fold it over and try to meet up those folded edges and then press it. And we're going to do this all the way down. All right, I've got everything pressed, but you can see it's not wanting to stay in. And so that's where these Quilter's Perfect clips come in really handy. I use them instead of pins whenever I'm doing bags because it's really a lot easier to just clip the side than it is to try to get a pin through all this thickness. So I'm just going to, as I work, just fold everything back in, and every 8 inches or so, just add a clip in there. And that will help keep everything together and make sewing this and top stitching it much more manageable. If you've watched any of my videos on sewing a 1/4 inch seam, you know this is not my favorite foot for piecing a 1/4 inch seam. This little guide on the edge I feel like gets in the way of your pins, and you end up having to pull it out the pins here instead of right here where everything will come together really well. But it's fabulous for whenever you have to do top stitching for a bag, because that little side piece will just fit right on the side and help you keep a really nice and even top stitch. So I love this foot for that. I think it has really great uses in specific circumstances, and this is one of them. Now, where you top stitch is a matter of personal preference. I really like the look of a 1/4 inch from the side, and then I increase my stitch length to 3.0 because it doesn't need to be a piecing stitch. We can, you know, increase that a little bit. You also can do things like try 40 weight Aurifil thread instead of 50 for a thicker thread look that looks more like what you would get in the store. It's a little bit harder to find. We don't stock it, and I just like to use kind of what I have on hand, which is all the 50 weight. But that is certainly an option. I'm just going with white for now. At some point I am going to switch to a teal when I'm working with the cork because I want it to match in that part. But for right now, everything is really light, and I think that that white looks a lot better than teal. That would really stand out here, and it wouldn't be good. All right, so I'm just getting started, and I'm keeping the guide of that foot nice and even with the edge. That way I can have that really nice professional looking finish on my bag straps whenever I'm top stitching. So I'm not really looking at where the needle is, I'm looking at where this guide is in relation to the edge. And I like to do that double fold side first because that's the one that's most likely to shift around on you. So let's get that secured, and then we can worry about the single fold side. You've also may be tempted to just kind of zoom through it because it's just a nice straight seam. But this is the details that if you take your time with them and go slow, it's really going to elevate the look of your bag and make it look very professional. Now that we have the double fold side all stitched down, we're going to go ahead and do top stitching on the other side as well. So now we're going to add on our slider and our hook for our hardware. Now, you don't need to be this specific when you do yours. But for mine, I would like my single fold edges to be facing my outer shoulders, so that way it looks nice and like I paid attention to that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it upside down like I would when I'm about to put everything in. So now I know that my single fold edge is facing this way, so I want to keep the single fold edge facing this way when this is also upside down. You know it's upside down when you have the brass parts coming on that side. So we're just going to thread this through. All right, and that is looking good, so I know that I'm going to have it on 2 opposite directions now, so I can put this to the side. Now we're going to turn this edge under and stitch it down. But to make that a little bit easier, I'm going to get rid of some of these extra threads and fraying edges. That way we have a nice neat finish. Now you kind of have to know how close you can get to the hardware with your sewing machine on how big to make this next part. But what we're going to do is we're going to fold it under, and then we're going to stitch it down. And you kind of want this to be a little close, but you also have to keep in mind that your foot of your sewing machine might bump into this. So you want to get it as close as you can so that we can stitch back and forth right here and conceal those raw edges. But also keep in mind you don't want to be sewing with your presser foot on top of this. So I'm going to consider this good. It's kind of arbitrary because it is going to have a slide on your backpack. So you're going to be able to get the straps to the same length even if this isn't exactly the same on both straps. but you want it to be relatively similar to whatever you do on the other side. All right, I had this clip in place just to hold it down until I can get it to the sewing machine. Since I'm not top stitching, I'm going to take this foot off for now, and I'm going to put my regular piecing foot back on. I'm going to remove the clip so that I have a little bit easier time sliding this underneath. And I'm going to start right even with that top stitching, and I'm going to do a lot of reversing to get that in there real good. So like 3 or 4 times back and forth. You can see what I mean where this slide here is really kind of hitting the edge of my foot. I could not really have gone too much further over there without being on top of that. So now I'm stitching to where the other top stitching line is, and I'm going to reverse it again quite a bit. And now once I've done that a few times, just because I'm extra paranoid, I want to make sure this is good, I'm going to reverse it all the way back to where I started and then all the way forward. I'm going to do that a couple times as well. And you kind of just want to make sure that you are staying on your stitching lines and everything is looking good. And when you're all done, finish by reversing and securing those threads. One more time. So we want to slide our hook on so that it's facing down when our slide is facing up. The idea here is to be able to pass our raw edge through that slide over top. And when we pull it straight, we have this hook hanging on the side here. So now working one at a time, we're also going to do the double fold and stitch down over our O-ring. Just like before, I'm going to start by trimming off these little stray threads so we have a nice clean space to work with. Next, we're going to thread it over the O-ring, and then making sure that the wrong side is up, we're going to fold this over twice and bring it over that O-ring. And then I'm just going to stitch down just like I did on the other ones to secure this. And the way I kind of do this is it's really nice to just work within the area that there's no interfacing. So right here is where my interfacing ends. So if I fold down halfway and then if I fold down again so that the end of my interfacing is on the edge, it makes it really easy to fold everything over and have it behave well for you. This process is the same as before. I'm going to start off by reinforcing my stitches quite a bit and going backwards and forwards. My machine was not super excited about stitching through all those layers. I've got a pretty good machine. So if you are having issues, just take it really slow as you're going through. And also make sure you're using a jeans needle. This is thick fabric and it is thick interfacing, so you want to make sure you have all of that going for you. All right, we're now going to add the other one. And this is the point where I'm going to make sure that I have my single fold edges facing what will be the outside. That way when this gets clipped onto the bag, you're just seeing the nice single fold edge instead of the double fold, which doesn't look as neat and tidy. All right, now I am ready to stitch and move on to the next step. All right, our backpack strap is complete. We can set it aside and move on to creating the bag. All right, we're going to select our piece D and we're going to use it to make our tabs. Now, because I'm using quilter's cotton for this, we're not using interfacing because we need it to be nice and flexible to fold over those D-rings. But the process of making this is the same as making the strap. The first thing we're going to do is match our long edges and give that a press hot dog style. Then we're going to fold both of our raw edges into the center and press. Go ahead and use some binder clips on the double fold side to keep it nice and together. And now we're going to top stitch down both sides to create that same top stitching look that we used on our straps. Now I did put my 1/4 inch foot with a guide on it because I really like that for top stitching. I think it gives me great results. And I'm going to increase my stitch length to 3.0. When you finish with the double fold side, also stitch down the single fold. Now you're going to take your rotary cutter and trim it into 5 equal size pieces. The measurement is in your instructions. So whenever I make one of these bags, I usually screw up at least one thing, and we definitely have one thing that I've screwed up here. So you're about to see me put these D-rings on all 5 of these tabs. That's wrong. You need to put a swivel hook on 1 of them and D-rings on 4. So this swivel hook is going to attach to our straps once we are all done. But when you see me line things up and sew them together, you're going to see the D-ring here because it's one of those situations where it's just too hard to refilm. So know that you're going to see this. It's going to be wrong. It should be the swivel hook at the top center and then your D-rings in the 4 sides. But know that you're not alone. If you mess something up, I do it too, but make sure you get that swivel hook there, and eventually it's going to be correct, but for a little bit you're going to see this as wrong because I have already sewn everything together by the time that I mess this up. So all I did, and if you do this too, is I just unpicked from about here to here, I slid it in and I stitched over it again within that seam allowance with that 1/8 of an inch stitch, and we're good to go on to the next step. So one other step that I skipped when I was making mine is I didn't use any fleece for my flap. And that's because the canvas I'm working with is very stiff already, and I didn't feel that it needed anything more in order to make this have good structure. You can see just how thick this is. It just really holds its shape all on its own. If you're using quilting cotton though, or any other substrate, I would recommend following the instructions by adding fusible fleece to your flap. Next, we're going to take our D-ring and we're going to slide that through, match up our raw edges, and stitch within the seam allowance. All these patterns are written with quilters in mind, so that's a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you want to stitch an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here to go straight down that edge. And I'm just going to prep them all up by folding them over and putting a clip on. That way I can chain piece all of these. So I keep my clip on until I have it at the sewing machine. And then I'm just going to start stitching across. I'm going to do a little bit of a back stitch at the front and end just so that this stays together. It's a really thick fabric with the canvas, and I don't want that to come apart as I'm working with it. But I am going to chain piece all of these. It's going to make it go a lot faster. I am also using my regular piecing foot again so that I can get that 1/8 of an inch stitch, so we don't see the stitching line when we put the bag together. For the measurements, you're going to want to refer to your pattern here, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the center of the top of piece A that we're going to use for our back. And we're going to center one of our tabs over that. And I'm just going to clip that in place until I can stitch down it. Now we're going to measure out from the sides and place our tabs at equal measures on either side of that. I always like to use friction gel pens whenever I'm marking these because they go away with heat later, so that way you know that if it is visible outside of your seam allowance in the end, you can just put a little iron near it and it'll be gone forever. Now I did, when I put these together, do half of it so that the single folds would be facing one way and half so they'd be facing the other way. I did that specifically so I could put them here, but now that I'm looking at this, I realize I really didn't have to do that because I can just flip them over. But I am making sure that my single fold edges are facing the outside again so that the single fold edges will be the most visible part of the bag. It is, if you totally skip that step and they just end up wherever, that's fine. Your bag is going to look great. It'll function just fine. It's just the next level thing that you can pay attention to if that's where you're at in your bag making journey. On the bottom, you also are going to mark your center, and then you're going to mark placement lines an even distance from that, and then clip them in place and ready to go. Again, all these measurements are listed in the pattern. You can get the Everly Backpack pattern by So Many Creations on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Now I'm going to stitch that 1/8 of an inch seam again across the bottom and across the top to secure these down. Now, this isn't the only seam that they're going to get encased in. When we put the bag together, they'll get stitched down again. This is just kind of to hold it in place until we're ready to do that step. All right, our back D piece is complete, so we can set that to the side and we're going to start working on our flap. Now your pattern is going to come with a template, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our paper scissors and we're going to cut that out. You want to be as close to the line as you can for this step. Now this says to cut it on the fold, but to make sure that everything turns out the right size, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to mark it on the bee template, and I'm going to have everything the way it's going to be when it's sewn together. So I'm going to take both my bees, I'm going to take my labels off, I don't need those. I'm going to take a look and I'm going to see which one do I want to be on the outside, which one do I think is prettier, and is going to look really nice out there. I do really like this butterfly. I think that would look really pretty on the outside. This one kind of has a lot going on, but like I said, I really like this butterfly. I think that would make a nice top. So we're going to make that our top side. And I'm going to go ahead and put these guys right sides together. And I'm going to take a couple of, or wrong sides together rather. And I'm going to take a couple of clips and I'm just going to keep everything together. Again, I'm making sure that both of them are facing up. That's important. We want them to be going the same direction. Put one in the center there since we're going to be cutting off those sides. And now I'm going to take that friction gel pen and I'm going to see where we're at here. So if I fold this in half, I believe we're going to have a little bit extra. Yes, we are. There's just a teeny little bit extra there. So I'm just going to start measuring this here, and I'm going to take and move these clips down so that they're going to be out of the way and everything can lay nice and flat. Now to help keep this stable, I'm going to remove that clip just a little bit, and I'm going to put that over like that. That way I've got everything in where it needs to be. I'm going to put a little mark down here. This is going to be not visible because it'll be within the seam allowance, but it tells me where I need to turn my paper over. Do the same thing up top here. Now I'm going to take my pen and I'm just going to outline. I'm doing it a little darker here so that you guys are going to be able to see it, but basically you just need to make sure that you can see it with whatever tool you're using. Okay, so I'm going to take my clip off and I'm going to slide this out here. And now I'm going to flip it over and I'm paying attention to where my marks are. I have one down here and one up here. So I'm going to get those lined up nice and straight, and also make sure I'm lined up at the top and just redo those clips to keep everything in line so I can trace around the other side. All right, now I've got my line of where I need to cut. So I'm going to start going around the edges of that with my fabric scissors. I'm going to keep my top clips in place because that'll help me keep everything together. And I'm also going to move some clips around too, so I can do this without having to pin, because it's really hard to pin because it's just so thick. So what I'm going to do, this isn't really holding in place anymore. So I'm just going to transfer that clip in. And I'm going to keep doing that as I work around. All right, now I can take my clips off temporarily, and I now have two pieces that are the same size, and I can move them to right sides together, re-clip them, and then we're going to stitch around here so we can stitch and flip and have everything be right side out. So I'm going to stitch around using that 1/4 inch seam. Now because I do have to turn this right sides out, I am going to reinforce these stitches so that I don't rip that open when I do take it off. You really want to be careful when you're doing this to make sure that you are keeping the edges even. If you don't, then you're going to end up seeing a raw edge on this, and it's going to be really hard to fix later. When we get to the top again, we're still going to reinforce those stitches so we have no problems turning. Now we're going to take and flip this right sides out. It might be a little challenging because this is very stiff. All right, this is looking very pretty. I'm going to go ahead and give the edges a spritz with my spray mister. I don't like using steam in my iron because I feel like it always gunks it up and makes it gross. So I do this instead. It gets everything wet enough as far as steam goes. I can get a really nice flat press and good sides before I top stitch. All right, I'm going to get that top stitching foot back out so I can stitch 1/4 inch around all the way around my edges. We're going to leave that top half free still. You really want to take your time when you're going around these curves. You want it to look nice and neat. This is going to be a very visible part of the bag. So just go very slow so you can keep that nice even top stitching from the edge. I'm very pleased with how even and nice this top stitching turned out. It looks so nice on the edge of that bag. So this is kind of our last chance to change our mind on what's going to be the front flap. So I've taken my A piece that I haven't used yet. That's going to be the front of the bag, and I'm lining it up to see what I think. It's going to line up about like this. It's not going to be exactly like this, but it's going to be kind of close. And so it is the busier of the bags. So I do kind of like how there isn't as much going on. We're still probably going to be able to see the majority of this butterfly here. If I flip it over, I feel like that's too much, like to have these two right here. I think it just makes the bag a lot busier. So I do kind of like the lighter part. So I think I've made a good choice here. I think it's good. And I think that this is going to overall be a good look. Take a look though before you start putting in your flip flop, because that's going to be your point of no return to make sure that you like the way that this looks. All right, so next we're going to install the flip lock. To do that, you obviously are going to need a flip lock. There is a female side and a male side. It also is really helpful to have a set of mini screwdrivers. I picked these up at the hardware store, but I even got my daughter like a tool set for her and from Target, and it had tiny little screwdrivers in this. So you can get these just about anywhere. Sometimes eyeglass screws will work as well. You just need something with a Phillips head that is tiny so that we can get these screws, because we're going to take this apart to have one side be on the outside and one side be on the inside. You can kind of pick which one you want to be where. One side is more textured than the other, so it's really up to you on what you want to be looking where. All right, so I'm going to take what I'm calling the back and I'm going to unscrew that section. All right, now these two pieces will pop apart. These ones on the front are pretty much decorative from what I can tell, so you don't have to worry about those. These little guys can roll away very fast. You want to keep them in a very safe place. I'm just going to set these inside here for safekeeping right now. So I've marked the center of my bag bottom and 1 inch on either side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to center these two bits over it, and I'm also going to mark kind of where the edges are, because I want to know how far out to make my cut, because what we need to do is slide this inside of there. So I've got marks from here to here. Now I'm not going to cut all the way there to start. I'm going to go in a little bit, and because you can always make it a little bigger, it's really hard to squeeze it in once you've done it. So we're just going to start with this and go from there. So I'm going to fold this exactly in half so that I can make that first cut. I'm using my micro tips for that. These are the sharpest little pointy scissors I own. This will help me get that initial cut. It doesn't need to be big, it just needs to be enough to be able to get those scissors through. And I'm cutting not all the way out to the edge, just most of the way there. Stopping maybe 1/8 of an inch away. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna test and see if I can get this in there, and I cannot. The hole is not big enough yet. I think we need just a little bit more. And again, I'm still not going all the way out to where I marked. I'm just gonna do a smidge more to see if that makes a difference. Our goal is to have the fabric go on either side of where those screws are, so that way we can screw that in from the back. So I can see one screw head poking through. See if we can get the other to come through. Not quite. We're gonna go ahead and open up a little further. All right, so we can see that our two little screw holes are poking out. So at this point, what you can do is you can open up the rest of it to go around. We don't want to be seeing any of this when we put it in. So what we can do now is we can put our screws back in with our plate on top. Now this is going to go here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of Gutermann glue in these screw holes. That's going to help keep everything where it needs to be and make sure it works out really well and stays put. This is strong stuff. You really don't need a lot. I'm just going to put a little bit in that screw hole on each side. You also could go around the edges here a little bit. You do not want to use a lot. It will get everywhere if you use too much. All right, so I'm just going to install that screw now. This is a lot easier to do on a flat tabletop like this. When you're done, if you have any errant little bits of thread like this, you can snip those away, or you can add a little bit of fray check to them. I'm going to try and just clip them out. All right, so there we go. We have installed the female side of our twist lock. It is looking rather sharp. We're gonna do one more thing while we let this dry. We're gonna take our bag back that we worked on earlier, and we're gonna lay it so that it's right sides together. What we wanna have happen is when this flips over, this part is going to be on the front and this part will be on the inside. So right sides together all the way when we do this, and we're gonna center it. If you've done this right, your bag flap should line up with the outsides of your strap handles that we put on there with those D-rings. I'm going to go ahead and clip this. Now this is a lot to go through. You might want to consider going to a walking foot if your machine is having trouble, but we are going to stitch within the seam allowance again. So that means we're going through an 1/8 of an inch stitch here, just so that way we can get this secured to the edge, and then it will be hidden when we sew the bag lining in later. Now there's a lot going on here. Just take your time. Make sure you've got that jeans needle in so it can handle it. All right, so what this should look like now is when we lift our flap up, we should see the right side of our bag back and the right side of our bag front. So I'm not going to share these measurements on the video. You'll have to refer to your pattern for that. Again, you can get the Everly backpack pattern on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. So it's going to tell you to mark a line down from the top and then 2 additional lines. These outside lines are going to be your zipper placement lines. And then these, we're going to sew on that. And then this center one is where we're actually going to cut. Now the next thing it's going to tell you to do is to mark your center and then mark lines on the outside of that so that we can create our zipper opening. The last thing you're going to want to do is just kind of eyeball in a 45-degree angle. This again is going to be a cut mark that we're going to follow in a little bit once we get everything ready to go. The other thing you want to do before you start marking everything is make sure that you are at the top. So in this case, we have birds that are going up. So I want to make sure that those are facing upward when everything is said and done. So I've got my A piece, everything's pointing up, and then I've made my mark for my zipper at the top of that. So my birds are facing upward when everything is assembled at the end of the bag. Next, we're going to take our C piece, and this does not have any kind of interfacing in it. It's going to be our pocket lining, and we're going to center it the best we can over this. Now, it doesn't matter a whole lot if it's not perfectly centered, but you want to do the best job you can because we are going to be sewing up the sides of C to create our inside pocket. So you want to do as good a job as you can. I'm going to go ahead and just clip the sides here just to kind of keep everything in place. So now using coordinating thread, I'm going to stitch all the way around the outside line. And I usually start in a little bit and then overlap my stitching lines. That way all my corners are very strong. So for this section, I like to have my needle in the center position rather than being in a 1/4 inch seam. I find it's easier to keep track on here that way. Once you hit that side, go ahead and give the work a turn. Stitch straight and go back the other way. All right, now I am back around to where I started. So I'm going to stitch beyond it about 1 inch or so, and just back those stitches up to lock them in place. Now the next thing we want to do is cut along the center line and also on those 45-degree lines we marked, so that way we can turn the entire pocket lining out. Now this is also a good checkpoint. Everything should be right sides together. I know this seems kind of weird at this point, but trust me, it works. Now you can take a rotary cutter and you can cut down this, or you can take a sharp pair of scissors like the micro tips I have here to get yourself started. What I like to do is just kind of fold it in half and give a little snip. Then I unfold and I'm making sure I'm cutting through both layers. I still have everything clipped out of the way, so I'm not cutting anything I don't want to there. All right, we're going to clip up to where those corners are. And then we're going to clip to the stitching, but not beyond. If you clip beyond, then you're going to have frayed edges and it's not going to work out. We want to make sure that that stitching line is intact, okay? All right, now that we've got everything off, we can go ahead and unclip these. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the pocket lining through the opening that we just cut. It doesn't matter so much what side you work from, but your goal here is to get a nice crisp folded edge here. I like to go at it first with my fingers, because when you have all that interfacing on it, it does kind of want to just fold back. And you don't want to see the lining from the front. So I like to work from the front, what will be the front anyway, if I can. And I'm going to get those two long seams tucked under and pressed first with my fingers. And then we're going to work on those side seams once we take the iron to it. All right, that gave me a pretty good start to this situation. What I'm going to do now is take my spray mister and get that seam good and wet. I don't like to use water in my iron because I feel like it has made every single iron I've ever had gross. So I use a spray mister and a dry iron instead. So I'm going to go ahead and pull back that seam and I'm going to hit it with my Aliso. I'm also using a wool pressing mat. I feel like the combination of the two always gets me really great, really flat joins, and I'm always really happy with it. We don't sell either of those things because they are challenging to ship in an economical way, but I highly recommend both to up your pressing game. All right, so I've got those sides done. Now we're going to do the same thing for that top seam. My goal here is to get it as flat as I can. And I'm kind of pulling it back so that that seam kind of rolls a little bit toward the back, and that will help keep everything nice and tidy here. All right, I'm going to flip this from the right side just to see how we're looking. Just want to make sure that everything is looking still pretty decent. And we are. I think I'm going to give it one more press from this side as well. So the next thing we're going to do is install our zipper, but what I like to do first is go ahead and give this another clip on the corners. That way I'm making sure to keep this pocket lining out of the way, and it also helps everything lay a little flatter when you're working. Now the instructions tell you to use a little bit of seam of seam in order to fuse your zipper in place. I've never been able to get that to work for me. So what I do is I center it as best I can, and just like when we stitched around starting a little bit below, it's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to stitch around as close to this edging as I can, starting right about here, and I'm going to work my way all the way around and go a little bit beyond where I started, backstitch, and go from there. But the reason why I start a little bit in is because, one, I'm not having to deal with the width of this zipper pull, and that's not going to get in the way of my stitching. And then I'm able to stitch and try to keep this zipper tape as centered as possible as I'm going all the way down. And then you just don't have to worry about it because it's already stitched in place. It's not going to move too much on you when you're going around the sides once you have the one side secured. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next. I'm getting that zipper as straight as I can down the middle of that opening. And I'm just stitching an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. I find that usually works pretty well for securing the zipper tape. All right, I've sewed about an 1/8 of an inch beyond the edge here. So I'm going to turn the work and I'm going to stitch slowly across the zipper teeth. These zippers are great. They look like metal, but they are actually plastic. So you can stitch right across them without worrying about that needle. All right, now I don't really have to worry too much about things moving around on me because we've already secured that down really well. All right, we're coming up to the point where I've got my zipper pull. What I like to do, just so it's not in the way, is lift up that presser foot so I can unzip my zipper, and then I'm just going to kind of hold it in place as close as I can and make my way down. Turn again and stitch across those teeth. And then in order to have a neat finish, it's really important that we try our best to stay right on top of that original stitching line, stitch beyond it just a little bit, and then reinforce those stitches so they don't come out. Now, before we do anything else, it's a really good idea to flip everything over and make sure that you've caught all the edges of that zipper teeth. And we have here that's looking really, really good. I know zippers can be super intimidating when we see them in patterns, but this is one of the easiest ways to do it. And I really love the results and how it works out. All right, now we're gonna finish up our pocket lining here. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna take and put our right sides together for our top and bottom. We're gonna sew those edges first. I'm just gonna use clips because that's what I've got out. I have no pins nearby, and I really just kind of need to hold these edges together. It's going to be on the inside of the pocket, so we don't have to worry about finishing off those edges or anything. I am using a 1/4 inch stitch for this, and I did not back stitch because we're gonna cover that line of stitching when we stitch up the sides. Now we're gonna take our iron and do a little pressing. Obviously we want that pocket to be going down toward the bottom of that bag. So what I'm gonna do here is just get that prepped and ready. So I'm gonna just do a little press up here just so I know that everything is facing down. I'm also gonna press down on that seam and down on where the pocket bottom is gonna be. Now we're just going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam down either side of these pocket sides, and then everything will be good to go, and all this stuff is going to be concealed on the inside of the bag. Again, you can use clips just to make sure that you are marking off your top and your bottom, but especially if you're using canvas like I am, you're going to be pretty good. You also can clip your zipper if it's hanging off too far. Mine is kind of long here, but I think it's going to be fine, so I'm just going to kind of leave it be. And I think it won't be a big deal to have it caught up in there. This part can be a little weird. What you want to do is kind of fold back the front of your bag just so that it's out of the way and you're just dealing with the lining. Now this section I am going to reinforce those stitches because we do not want our pocket lining to come apart, because if that happens, then we're going to be losing things on the inside of our bag, and that's no good. Now we're going to repeat everything on the other side. Since I folded that back, I'm going to give those areas a good press with my spray mister before I move on. This is not really a project that you can press easily once it's together, so it's a good idea to make sure that your pieces are looking good in between steps. All right, now it is time to add the male end of our twist lock. The first thing we want to do is make sure that this pocket is going to be out of the way. So you just want to flip that up, and I'm just going to clip it on either side to keep it out of that way of where we're going to be cutting and marking. Now the male end of your twist lock is going to come with two pieces. There's going to be a part that you see with these little brackets that we're going to stick through. And then we also have our bracket, which helps keep it in place without pulling out over time. So what we want to do is you want to take your twist lock, you want to see where those little prongs end up. In my case, they're going through those outsides. So that's what I want to mark. Now the pattern is going to tell you where to center this. So I've marked my center from down and then also across, and that's where I want to place my washer so that I know where things are. And now I know that the outside prongs are what I need to worry about. So I'm going to mark those, and then I'm going to go ahead and clip where I've marked on those pink lines so that I can push the prongs through. So just like when we were getting that zipper started, what I'm doing is just kind of folding that in half, giving it the teeniest of trims. I always like to err on the side of caution by going smaller rather than larger on this. All right, that's looking good. We're gonna test it, make sure that our prongs go through just fine, and they do, that's good. So now we're gonna flip it over and we're gonna put the metal bracket on the back side. You might have to do a little bit of configuring in order to get that on. There we go, that's looking good. And you know, you can flip it really either way, I think. I think you can flip it out or you can flip it in, over. As long as these are flipped nicely on each other, I think you're fine. I'm gonna go ahead and push mine in. All right, that prong is looking good from the back side. I did end up moving it in a little. I felt like that was working better for me, but you know, it might be a little bit different depending on you and what you have going on with yours. You could add a little bit of fray check to this to make sure that it doesn't come apart. I'm also gonna give it a good press around here just to make sure I've got all of my markings off, and again, it's super flat for when we put everything together. Sometimes people also like to add a little bit of scrap of interfacing within here or on top of, or also fleece works as well, fusible fleece. All right, next we're gonna finish up our outside of our bag. We'll do the lining all in one go once the outside is all assembled and ready to go. So the next step is to put our bag bottom on. I'm using cork in this beautiful lagoon color. I think it looks absolutely fabulous with this, and it'll be good because it's a nice dark color, so that way if the bottom of the bag gets dirty, that'll be fine. We don't have to worry about the white getting gross. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna clip this in place, making sure that it is along the bag bottom in both instances. And when I clip, I just clip along the bottom, in the corners, and in the center. We're gonna do that on both sides. Now we're just gonna stitch a 1/4 inch seam down both sides of this, and I do reinforce the stitches at the beginning and end because we want this to be nice and sturdy. All right, I'm gonna start by reinforcing those stitches. And this is not long enough to get through here, but it is super bulky. So I am just gonna move the flap out of the way so that way it's just one less thing to be dealing with. Now we are sewing through a lot of layers here, so just take your time, make sure you have that jeans needle in there. Now you can press cork, and we are gonna do just that. I'm gonna press it so that the seam is going to be going under the bag top. I'm gonna go ahead and finger press that first, and then I'm just going to go over that seam just to get it good and set in there. Next, we're gonna top stitch about 1/8 of an inch to make sure that we're securing that seam so it's always pointing up there, and we have a nice bag that's not going to look weird because the seam has flipped back the other way. I'm going to do that on both sides. Now for this section, I am going to go ahead and let these D-rings flap down. Because if you think about it, this is going to have our straps hooked onto it. And so we're going to be able to let those kind of come down and then up over our body. All right, now we're gonna top stitch an 1/8 of an inch seam along both of these sections. Again, I increased my stitch length to 3.0. Make sure you're taking your time when you're going over these tabs because it's a lot of layers, it's really thick. So just go slow and you won't have any skip stitches. All right, we've got our bag outsides almost ready to go. Next, we're going to sew together our divided pocket for our lining so that we're ready to finally assemble this bag. Here's one thing you'll notice if you have directional fabric like me. Now, the instructions will tell you that it needs to be X amount wide and X amount high, and then you're going to fold it in half and create your divided pocket with this. So when you follow those instructions, you actually end up with it going the wrong way because eventually what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to fold this in half right sides together, and then the divided pocket will get turned right sides out and it'll be the same width. But in this case, the feathers, which is from my fabric collection, a Nocturne with QT Fabrics, that's going to be really obvious that that is not quite right. So what I'm going to do is we're only dealing with an extra inch this way. I am just going to chop that down and I'm going to go with it this way. So that way it'll be a little bit shorter of a pocket, but it'll still hold plenty. My cell phone will probably still fit in there. And then I can have my feathers going the right way. So if you too are getting infuriated by this, just cut an inch off of that and turn it the other direction. It'll be totally fine. So now when I take my divided pocket piece and I put it over, I'm going to be able to sew that so it's right sides together and my feathers are all going in the same direction. So we're going to be good. So I'm going to set my G piece, which is my lining piece, to the side for now. And what we're going to do is we are going to fold this right sides together, and we are just going to stitch along our long edge only. You can go ahead and pin this if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch it with that 1/4 inch seam. I am going to go ahead and reinforce these stitches just because I have to turn it all right sides out. Now we're going to take this piece and we're going to turn it right sides out. And the easiest thing to do is to just line it up on the back like this. And I'm just kind of pressing that seam so that it's all going in one direction. And I'm just going to press on top of that and then also press my top and bottom of my pocket in place here. Now, making sure that my directional fabric is still in fact going in the right direction, in this case that all my feathers are pointing down, I'm going to go ahead and line that pocket up the distance that's specified in the pattern from the top. I'm going to go ahead and clip that in place. So I've marked the center of my pocket. I'm going to stitch down that at the end. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little bit above where my divided pocket is, and I'm going to stitch all the way down to where my bottom is, and then I'm going to stitch across so that I'm covering the bottom of that pocket, creating the edge there, and then again stitching within that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to start stitching just a little bit above here, reinforce my stitches, and stitch all the way down and reinforce my stitches at the bottom. That way I've created a nice strong divided pocket, and then it'll get all enclosed in the seams when we sew our bag together. All right, I'm about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom, so I'm going to turn the work so it's toward me, and then lining up the foot with the bottom of that pocket edge, I'm going to go ahead and stitch that down. All right, we're back to that 1/8 of an inch stitch on the side, so we're going to turn the work again and stitch up that side. Again, we're going to stitch a little bit beyond there just to secure that pocket together. It'll get stitched down again when we join our sides. Now I've switched my stitching to have my needle in the center. I'm going to start right at the bottom of that seam and reinforce that stitch because this will take a little bit of stress. We want to make sure it's doing a good job. Then we're just going to stitch up that center seam. And I'm going to stitch a little bit beyond where that pocket starts and back it up again because this is a point where it's going to take some stress. We want to make sure it's nice and strong. I'm going to give that a little press to remove the line I marked in there and also get that pocket nice and flat. Now we are ready to cut corners and assemble our bag. Now you're going to take a ruler and a marking tool and you are going to mark out the box corners. The measurement is given in the pattern. You can get that over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Again, this is called the Everly Backpack by So Many Creations. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out those corners so we can create box corners to create dimension in the bag when it's all assembled. I like to use a really sharp pair of micro tips for this. That way I can get right into the corners and then turn it and go from the other side. You're going to repeat that step on all the bottom corners for the lining and the outside of your bag. So now we're going to take both our outside pieces and our lining pieces and assemble them so that they are right sides together. And we're going to clip and sew up the sides and the bottom. Now, neatness does count when you are working with the outside. You want to try as best you can to match up where the bag top meets the bag bottom so you have a nice even line going all the way around. It's really obvious if you mess that up. So I'm actually going to start right there and I'm going to place my clip right at the bottom of where that seam allowance kind of comes together. And then I'm going to clip my top and then in the middle as well. Same thing over here. On the lining, you can get away with a few less clips, But there's one thing that's special with the lining that we're not going to do with the others, and that is we only want to stitch about 1 inch in on either side of this bottom. You want to leave this center open for turning, and make sure you reinforce these stitches really well so you don't accidentally rip it when we are pulling the entire bag through that section. Trust me, it's no fun. All right, now there's one last thing that you may want to consider. I'm using white thread, or have so far. You may want to consider switching to a dark thread for this section here. So what you would do is you would come and you would reinforce your stitches really well, like right here, and then switch to a darker thread to do your bag bottom, because you do see those threads when it is open, and this is such a dark cork that it might be kind of obvious. So I think I'm going to do that with mine, and I'm just going to really reinforce those seams right where this cork starts and stops, so that way it overlaps just a little bit and you won't see too much of it, but it should be good to go. The other thing you want to do is really make sure that you're getting a really good quarter seam and that your edges are really nicely lined up, because there is no worse thing than when you open that bag up and you get everything pulled out and you find out that you were off on these edges and you can see a little bit of your interfacing poking through. It's not fun. Trust me, you don't want to have that happen. I'm going to do everything with my white thread that I can. So I'm starting with my bag lining, and I am reinforcing these stitches again because we got a lot to put together and fold together at this point. Reinforce at the end. Now here I am at my bag bottom. I'm going to go ahead and stitch and reinforce that corner, and then I'm going to stitch in just about 1 inch and reinforce everything. It's looking pretty good. And then I'm just going to do this final inch over here as well. Again, reinforcing this first stitches really, really well so we don't rip that open. All right, this is the part that really matters. This is your outside. This is where you want to take extra care to make sure that your edges are nice and lined up so you don't end up with interfacing poking out because your seam allowances were off. You want to go nice and slow, reinforce those stitches at the start and stop. All right, now I've gotten to the point where it's going to start transitioning into the cork where we're going to see it. So I'm going to take a few more stitches forward, and then I'm going to reinforce those stitches really, really well here. And I'm going to stop now and sew the other side with the white before switching threads, so that way I don't have a really harsh white thread showing off on my dark bag bottom. All right, so I've got my thread changed to something that's going to blend better with my bag bottom. And I'm starting about 1/4 inch before I ended the last thread, so I've got a good overlap there, reinforcing that really well. And then I'm going to stitch the entire bag bottom with this thread. All right, now it's time to create our box quarters. That's what creates the dimension and the depth in the bag. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pinch it, and you want to get it so that they're going in opposite directions. So it makes for a nice, really flat seam, and this should kind of be flat when you sew it. Like you can see it's kind of flattening out there, and that's perfect. That's what we want. So I'm flipping it so that the bag bottom is going off to the right. There's no like hard and fast rule of why you have to do it that way. It just is working that way for me right here and now. Now, if I wanted to, I could also clip these edges here, but what I want to do is make sure that my seam is going the same direction. So since I've turned it around, that bag bottom seam is now going to the left. So I want to make sure that the other seam is going to the right on that side. So that way this is a nice flat seam, and I'm going to give that a clip as well. So now we're just going to stitch across this, and it's a good idea to stitch it a couple of times. This is a point where you're going to get a lot of stress and a lot of wear and tear on your bag. So going across that 2-3 times, totally fine. I'm going to do the same thing on the lining. That one I don't put as much pressure or stitching on. Just once across is usually fine there. Now we're going to stitch this with a 1/4 inch seam, and since you are probably never ever going to see this bag bottom corner again, I'm just going to keep that dark teal thread in for now and wait to switch it out until I'm sewing my tops together. Make sure you're reinforcing those stitches at the beginning and end of your box corners. So I've turned my bag lining so it's right side out. That way when I put these together, our right sides are going to be facing each other. I also want to make sure that my divided pocket is going to be facing the bag back. Your flap should also be going inside at this point. And now we're going to line up our tops. We want to get those seams lined up together, preferably with them going in opposite directions. And again, I'm just going to put some clips around there. I'm also putting a few more clips at the center and about 1/4 of the way through on both sides. Now to make this next step a little easier, I'm going to remove the compartment box from my sewing machine. That way I can just slide the bag right over top to do my 1/4 inch stitch around. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce those stitches to start. And this is another instance where you really just want to go slow. Make sure that all of your edges are lined up really well, because you don't want to flip this around and have your interfacing showing. This is not a hard part, but it is an awkward one. As you manipulate everything going around here, it's a lot of thick layers. It's a lot of stiff interfacing. So it can be a little challenging as you work your way around. But the one thing to keep in mind as you get around places like this where we sewed like our flap on and you have some stitching that's supposed to be within the seam allowance, make sure you're stitching to the left side of that so that it's only visible are the turning of it and not the threads that we stitched in to keep our elements in place as we worked. All right, we are almost done, but now we get to see the fruits of our labor. What we're going to do is we're going to very carefully pull out this lining, and we're going to pull the entire bag out through this lining. Now we've got a lot of bulk, we have a lot going on. You want to be slow at this step because we don't want to rip open those stitches. They're no fun to close up by hand. All right, I've got my lining almost all the way out. There's a couple things I want to do with this step. First, I want to inspect my edges to make sure that I've got those really well. I don't have any lining sticking out. That's really easy to do if you've gotten off on your stitches. I'm looking pretty good here. I'm happy with the results. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hands through to the bottom, poke those corners out really well here while I can reach them all on their own. And again, I want to inspect this bottom seam to make sure everything is looking good. It is. I'm very glad that I chose to switch to that darker thread because it looks really good here. And that white would have really been very obvious and not great. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to close up this top seam by machine. You can do it by hand, but let's be honest, I've used a lot of bags where I intend to do this by hand and I never have, and I'm still using them without it sewn up. So I'm going to show you to do it by machine. So what you do is you kind of just take your fingers on the side and it's going to want to turn in on its own. So you're going to let it do that. And then we're just going to take our clip and we're going to put it in at the sides just to help keep that turned in. And then I'm just going to stitch as close to this edge as I can to seal that up without taking up a lot of bulk, and just let that work. Alternatively, you could whip stitch this by hand as well. So now I'm just going to stitch as close to the edge of the stitch as I can using my sewing machine. So you can see that stitching line is very narrow. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. It's way at the bottom. If you're really looking that close, you have lost something really bad. So you'll be fine. We're just going to shove it in now and make it look nice so we can press top stitch and call it done. So you can see our flap is now outside. So now we can take this lining and shove it back in. Now at this point, the bag is easier to press on an ironing board. instead of the flat piece that I have here. But what we're going to do is we're just going to press really well along this entire top area, so that way we can top stitch around it and have that final line of stitching to keep everything in place as we're using the bag. I'm going to go ahead and give it a good mist with my spray mister, so that way I can get a nice crisp steam. Now, since this line of top stitching really matters, I did get out my 1/4 inch foot that has a guide, so that it'll help me stay nice and true as I'm going around. One other thing you want to make sure you're doing is that you've got your buckles going up and out of the way when you're going and stitching around. But again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, for right now, I'm going to tuck this inside here until I make it around. But I'm going to go ahead and stitch around this way. I think that will be the easiest way to do it. And I'm going to make sure that I am tucking that seam in as I go. Since this is a 1/4 inch stitch, I'm going to go ahead and keep that needle in the center, but I am going to increase that stitch length to 3.0. And as I stitch around, I'm just going super slow. Slow down your speed if you have to. I'm making sure that this lining is tucked back out of the way, and that all other elements are out of the way as we go around. All right, I'm getting to the point where we're at the side, so I'm going to take my flap out. I'm just going to reposition that a little bit as we go. All right, when we get to this bag back, that guide is going to be going right in that seam line in order to keep that 1/4 inch away from the top. All right, as you come around to where you started, make sure that you're right on top of your stitching line and that you reinforce those stitches to secure them in place. All right, so you might want to give the bag another press here, but at this point we are ready to go ahead and do that clip and add our straps. My gosh, I love this so much. I'm so excited with how this turned out. This has been on my to make bucket list for years. I think we cut this project originally when I was pregnant with my daughter, who is about to celebrate her 3rd birthday. I really love how this turned out. It's just so my colors, and it's so cute, and that cork bottom is going to make this super durable. So I think you guys are going to love it too. And again, we've got the 2 colorways that you can choose from, both that Western horse themed one and this one here, which is my personal favorite. And I'm going to be stealing this one. At the end of the year, we have a sample spree where our team gets to pick their favorites to at our Christmas party, but I snag the ones that I like first, and this one's gonna be mine. So I wish I could wear it right now, but it's rainy and gross outside, and so I need to wait until I can photograph it, and then I can wear this about town. All right, make sure you get all the things. The pattern, the Everly backpack by So Many Creations, is available at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, and we have kits while supplies last of the 2 options. So thanks so much for following along. I hope this video helped you as a nice supplement to the pattern, and until next time, happy quilting.